In the dim glow of a flickering street lamp on a rain-slicked alley in the heart of New York City, Alexander Harrington, a man whose fortune could buy empires but whose heart lay in ruins, stumbled upon a scene that shattered his world anew. His infant son, Ethan, barely 3 months old and the last tether to his late wife, had vanished from their penthouse nursery just hours earlier, snatched in a brazen kidnapping that left the nanny unconscious and the security systems inexplicably breached. Alexander, driven by a father's primal desperation, had ignored the police advisories and torn through the city himself, following a cryptic tip that led him to this forsaken corner of the urban underbelly. Pushing open the creaky door of an abandoned warehouse, his breath caught in his throat as he beheld her, a disheveled young woman, no older than 25, huddled in a corner with tattered blankets, gently cradling a tiny bundle to her chest. The baby's soft cries turned to contented gurgles as she breastfed him, her eyes closed in weary tenderness, oblivious to the intruder. But Alexander knew that cry, that tuft of dark hair. It was Ethan, his Ethan, in the arms of a complete stranger. If you believe in the power of kindness and second chances, hit that like button, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of humanity's goodness, and don't forget to subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories that touch the soul and inspire the heart. Alexander froze in the doorway, the rain pounding relentlessly outside mirroring the storm raging within him. His mind raced back to the day Ethan was born, a day that should have been pure joy but instead became the pinnacle of his sorrow. His wife, Isabella, had been the light of his life, a vibrant artist whose laughter filled their sprawling mansion with warmth that no amount of wealth could replicate. They had met in college, two souls from opposite worlds. Him, the heir to a tech empire, her, a struggling painter from a modest family. Their love had been fierce and unyielding, culminating in the news of her pregnancy after years of trying. But complications arose in the final trimester, and during delivery, Isabella's heart gave out, leaving Alexander alone with a newborn son and a void that echoed through his empty halls. He had thrown himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he applied to boardroom conquests, hiring the best nannies, installing state-of-the-art security, and vowing to protect Ethan from the cruelties of the world that had already stolen so much from him. Yet here he was, powerless, watching a stranger nourish his child as if it were her own. Rage bubbled up first. How dare she? But as he stepped closer, the dim light revealed more: the woman's gaunt cheeks, the bruises on her arms, the way her clothes hung loosely on a frame worn by hardship. She wasn't a kidnapper, she was a survivor, and in that moment, Alexander's world tilted on its axis. The woman, whose name he would later learn was MIA, opened her eyes at the sound of his approach, her body tensing like a cornered animal. She clutched Ethan tighter, her protective instinct flaring despite the fear etched across her face. Alexander raised his hands in surrender, his voice caught in his throat, but he didn't call the police immediately as every fiber of his being screamed he should. Instead, he sank to his knees on the cold concrete floor, the weight of exhaustion and grief pulling him down. Mia's story unfolded in fragments over the next harrowing minutes, pieced together through her hesitant whispers and the evidence around her: a makeshift bed of cardboard, a few scavenged cans of food, and a backpack stuffed with baby supplies that looked suspiciously new. She had been living on the streets for months, ever since her abusive boyfriend abandoned her after discovering she was pregnant. Her own child, a daughter born prematurely, hadn't survived the birth, leaving MIA shattered and adrift in a city that swallowed the vulnerable whole. That very evening, as she scavenged for shelter from the storm, she stumbled upon a black van screeching away from an alley, leaving behind a crying infant bundled in a blanket. Without hesitation, she had scooped him up, her maternal instincts overriding the danger, and fled to this warehouse to keep him safe and fed from her own body, her milk still flowing from the loss of her daughter. Alexander's heart twisted as he listened, the initial fury giving way to a profound empathy he hadn't felt since Isabella's passing. He had built his empire on calculated risks and unyielding control, amassing billions through innovative software that connected the world digitally while he remained isolated in his grief. Friends had drifted away, unable to penetrate his walls of mourning, and his days blurred into nights of work and whispered lullabies to Ethan. The kidnapping had been a targeted hit, he realized now, likely orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee seeking ransom, but the perpetrators had panicked and abandoned the child when sirens wailed in the distance. MIA, in her act of selfless compassion, had become Ethan's unwitting guardian angel. Yet, as the police sirens grew closer, Alexander had texted his location to authorities discreetly. Doubt crept in. What if she was lying? What if this was part of a larger scheme? He watched her rock Ethan gently, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and terror, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt the stirrings of something beyond his own pain: connection. He reached out, not to take his son, but to steady her trembling hand, a silent promise forming in the space between them. The authorities arrived in a flurry of flashing lights and urgent voices, sweeping into the warehouse like a tidal wave. MIA recoiled as officers approached, her arms instinctively shielding Ethan, but Alexander intervened, his commanding presence cutting through the chaos. He explained the situation with the poise of a man used to boardrooms, insisting that MIA wasn't a suspect but a hero who had saved his son's life. The police were skeptical at first, running background checks and questioning her relentlessly, but the evidence supported her tale. Security footage from nearby cameras showed the van's reckless abandonment, and Mia's fingerprints were nowhere near the penthouse crime scene. As Ethan was handed back to Alexander, the baby fussing at the separation from Mia's warmth, a pang shot through the millionaire's chest. He saw the way Mia's eyes lingered on the child, a mother's longing that mirrored his own loss. In that moment, amid the sterile questions and flashing badges, Alexander made a decision that would upend his carefully constructed life. He offered MIA a ride to the hospital for a checkup, citing the need to ensure she was all right after her ordeal, but deep down, he knew it was more. He couldn't let her vanish back into the shadows that had nearly claimed her. At the hospital, under the harsh fluorescent lights, Mia's vulnerabilities were laid bare. Doctors confirmed she was malnourished, with old bruises from her past abuse healing slowly, and her body still recovering from the traumatic birth of her stillborn daughter. Alexander sat in the waiting room, Ethan asleep in his arms, replaying the night's events like a film reel. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from his company executives, concerned about the kidnapping's impact on stock prices, but for once, he ignored them. Isabella's voice echoed in his mind, her words from their happier days: "Wealth means nothing without heart, Alex. Use it to lift others, not just yourself." He had dismissed it then, focused on expansion and acquisitions, but now, holding his son safe because of a stranger's kindness, those words burned. When MIA emerged, bandaged and weary, he approached her with an offer that stunned them both: a job as Ethan's nanny, with room and board in his mansion, no strings attached. She hesitated, her eyes wide with disbelief. Why would a millionaire trust a homeless woman with his child? But Alexander saw in her the resilience Isabella had possessed, and he needed that light in his darkened world. The first weeks in the mansion were a delicate dance of adjustment and unspoken tensions. MIA moved into a spacious guest suite overlooking the manicured gardens, a far cry from the streets she had known. She cared for Ethan with a tenderness that eased Alexander's constant worry, her natural bond with the baby allowing him to return to work without the gnawing anxiety that had plagued him. Yet, shadows lingered. Alexander struggled with trust, installing additional cameras and hovering more than necessary, his grief manifesting as overprotectiveness. MIA, haunted by her losses, woke from nightmares of her abusive past, sometimes cradling Ethan in the night to soothe her own aching heart. There were moments of friction, when Alexander snapped at her for changing Ethan's routine, or when MIA withdrew into silence, fearing she was overstepping. But gradually, vivid scenes of shared vulnerability bridged the gap. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Alexander found MIA in the nursery, tears streaming down her face as she sang a lullaby to Ethan, a song her own mother had taught her. He lingered in the doorway, unseen, his chest tightening with memories of Isabella humming similar tunes during her pregnancy. When MIA noticed him, She wiped her eyes hastily, but Alexander stepped forward, sharing for the first time the story of his wife's death, the raw pain spilling out like a dam breaking. As days turned to months, the mansion transformed from a mausoleum of grief into a home alive with tentative hope. Alexander began to notice the small things: Mia's quiet efficiency in organizing the household, her gentle way of encouraging him to eat proper meals instead of working through the night, the way Ethan's eyes lit up at her presence. He faced his own challenges head-on, attending therapy sessions he had long avoided, confronting the isolation that had become his armor. Mia, too, struggled. Flashbacks to her abandonment left her doubting her worth, and she often wandered the gardens at dawn, whispering apologies to her lost daughter. But Alexander's support was unwavering. He connected her with counselors, helped her enroll in online courses to pursue her dream of becoming a nurse, and ensured she had time for herself. Suspense built in subtle ways. Anonymous threats from the kidnappers resurfaced, forcing Alexander to heighten security and confide in Mia about his fears. In one heart-pounding night, when a suspicious figure lurked near the gates, it was Mia who alerted him, her street-honed instincts proving invaluable. Together, they navigated the investigation, the police eventually apprehending the culprits, a ring tied to his former employee, solidifying their alliance. Emotion deepened as their lives intertwined. Alexander found himself drawn to Mia's quiet strength, her laughter echoing Isabella's in ways that healed rather than hurt. He organized a small memorial for her stillborn daughter, planting a cherry blossom tree in the garden, a gesture that brought Mia to her knees in grateful tears. In return, she encouraged him to reclaim joys long forgotten: family outings to the park where Ethan giggled on swings, quiet dinners where stories of their pasts wove into a shared future. The turning point came during a fierce winter storm, reminiscent of the night they met. Power outages plunged the mansion into darkness, and as they huddled by the fireplace with Ethan between them, Alexander opened up about his deepest fear: that he was failing as a father, just as he had failed to save Isabella. Mia, her hand resting on his, shared her own guilt over surviving when her child hadn't, and in that vulnerability, barriers crumbled. He realized she wasn't just a nanny, she was the family he had lost and found again. What followed was a cascade of changes that rippled outward. Alexander, inspired by Mia's resilience, launched a foundation in Isabella's name, dedicated to supporting homeless mothers and at-risk families. Mia became its ambassador, her story drawing donations and volunteers, transforming her pain into purpose. Ethan thrived under the dual care. His first words, "Mama," directed at Mia, a moment that brought Alexander to tears not of jealousy, but of profound gratitude. Romance blossomed slowly, cinematic in its subtlety: stolen glances over breakfast, hands brushing during walks, a first kiss under the blooming cherry tree as spring arrived. Alexander proposed on Ethan's first birthday, not with ostentatious jewels, but with a simple ring Isabella had once worn, symbolizing continuity and new beginnings. They married in a quiet ceremony in the garden, surrounded by the foundation's beneficiaries, a testament to how one act of kindness had rewritten their fates. Years later, as Alexander watched Mia chase a toddler Ethan through the same gardens, now expanded into community spaces, he marveled at the life they had built. His empire had grown, but so had his heart, proving that true wealth lay in connections forged from brokenness. Mia, now a certified nurse running clinics for the underprivileged, often reflected on that rainy night, grateful for the stranger's baby who had saved her as much as she saved him. Their story became a beacon, shared in TED Talks and articles, inspiring countless others to extend hands across divides. If this story has touched your heart and reminded you of the transformative power of compassion, please like, comment, and subscribe to keep these tales of hope alive. And before we end, I'd love for you to comment below with the line, "Kindness changes everything." Let's flood the comments with positivity. In the end, what began as a widowed millionaire's desperate search evolved into a legacy of love, proving that sometimes, the most profound changes come from seeing humanity in a stranger's eyes.